I woke up this morning with a thought in my mind about the biblical image of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, from which Adam and Eve eat, thus bringing about the fall of man. And this thought was sort of there in my mind. The first thing, uh, well, I was lying in bed this morning, having just woken up, and I wanted to develop it and explore it a little bit here because it seems rather interesting to me. So, what the thought is that the discourse within the philosophy of religion about theism and atheism um, represents the knowledge of good and evil, basically. There's kind of a bifurcation, a split in the discourse, which goes like this. The best, not the best argument which atheists have against theism is evil, the knowledge of evil, which is one of the things which is said to um, sort of have brought about the fall of man, this imbibing of the knowledge of good and evil. So the thought is that the knowledge of evil is basically atheism and the atheistic critique of religion. Um, and just to complete the thought, the knowledge of good is the theistic argument. The strongest argument for both camps represent knowledge of good and evil. The knowledge of good and evil together represent the theistic and the atheistic philosophical positions, the best arguments that can be marshaled for each position. So let me explore that a little bit. I had what came to mind with the knowledge of evil and the atheistic arguments was just Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov, in which the brother Ivan, I was just reading some of it now. I was going to read it out, but it's not very pleasant to read out. But it's from the chapter Mutiny, or I think it's also called Rebellion, in the Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov. And there you do really get, to my mind, the strongest, one of the strongest and most articulated arguments for atheism that there is. Because Brother Ivan discusses the torture of children, the killing of children, torture of children, and um, the entire chapter is horrific to read. It's completely horrific. The horrific evils that are described there, I can't read out here. Um, but the point is that Ivan's just saying, you know, innocent children being tortured and killed. What good God, you know? How can I believe in a good God um, in such a world where I read in the newspaper these stories, the novel set in 19th century Russia and such stories, what Dostoevsky was drawing on real stories. Um, you know, how can I believe in the goodness of God when there is such evil in the world? Um, How could such good God permit this evil? This is also known as, the problem of evil within the philosophy of religion. And so you have on the topic of evil too, it's the evil is often something associated with intention and the morality of human beings, that like a corrupted and immoral person is the font of evil. But there's also, and I don't know if the word evil is appropriate here, but there's also so-called natural evils, such as cancer, such as terminal disease, such as diseases that afflict human beings, and people dying young, and hurricanes, tsunamis, natural volcano eruptions, these kind of things. Um, and it's important to decompose those into two categories, I think, because on the one hand, the depravity of human beings is something to which we could in principle take accountability for and remedy and transform in our own hearts. The world could be transformed and transfigured in principle if evil was merely a form of moral degradation, which it most certainly is. But then you have this problem of natural evils too, natural so-called disease, natural disaster. And it's not so clear like what could be done about those things. Um, from a moral perspective, from the perspective of what responsibility we could take for these things, they just seem to be a part of a feature of the world. Um, and then you can also get into things about sort of eating animals and subsisting off the death of other life forms. You know, is that another natural evil? That's a hotly debated topic. If you think about things like veganism and vegetarian movements that sort of insist that it is in principle unethical to consume other sentient living beings in this way. Um, so yeah, this is the thought anyway. I'm just developing it here, that the knowledge of evil is the seed of atheism. It's the seed of atheism, because from this knowledge of evil, the greatest and the most forceful objection to the notion of a good God is developed. It's the greatest argument against God springs from this seed, this knowledge of evil. The knowledge of good, by contrast, is the strongest theistic argument, I think, because the point is that yes, there may be evil in the world, but there is also good in the world. There is beauty in the world. There are eternal truths that the mind of man can contact, and saints exist. Righteous and just human beings exist who are not morally depraved, whose souls have not degraded to the extent of a murderer. Uh, the murderer, the murderers discussed in Dostoevsky's novel that Ivan lists and cites as his paradigms of evil. The opposite of those exist, and these are the saints, the holy ones, um, who are recognized in all major world traditions, the holy and good human being, the fully realized or divinized human being. Um, this is a possibility too, the theist would insist. And so that's the knowledge of good is the counterpoint. And you know, okay, perhaps I can come to this in a minute, actually. Like, so you weigh these up, and you could say that they both have quite strong arguments. Like, I really do feel this. Like, I do feel like that the atheistic objection on the basis of evil is incredibly potent. And I frankly fall silent sometimes in even contemplating it. Like, if you read the moral sort of outrage of Brother Ivan in the Brothers Karamazov, um, it's horrifying to read. And these things do and did and have and are happened, in the history of mankind, great evils and great suffering. Um, and that's not something to which an easy answer or response is given. This is also the theme of the book of Job in the Old Testament, um, which incidentally I find particularly interesting that scripture has within it a like the strongest objection against it. Um, so I find that particularly, yeah, curious anyway, with the book of Job. So where are my thoughts going with this? So okay, so that seems like strong on the atheistic side, like knowledge of evil. And then knowledge of good seems like a really strong point on the theistic side. Because in the same way, the atheist can point to examples of evil, the theist can point to examples of good, and they're at loggerheads, right? Both seem to have strong arguments against the other. And so then it's hard to say, like, where we might fall on this because you might be quite persuaded of the evil of the world, of reality, of the sufferings of the world in reality, and in that emphasis might adopt an atheistic view. And I would say rightly so. I think you'd have good reasons for doing that. And on the other hand, I think that you could quite rightly insist on the beauty, the goodness, and the glorious wonder and order not the wonder, but like the order and the rationality and the intelligence with which the world is structured, the marvels of it, and you could wonder at that and say, well, how comes that as well? And so I think that would be a really strong uh, argument and good and give a good foundation for atheism too. So this picture might like lead us to think that atheism and theism are both sort of relative. Because from what I've said so far, we could imagine a person having good reasons for adopting both positions. One, as I said, is based on the seed of the knowledge of evil, and the other is based on the knowledge of good. And that these both give strong arguments for their position, and they're kind of at loggerheads. And it might just be a question of emphasis at that point. But the sort of intuition that I had this morning was like that there's a kind of asymmetry between these as well. So like the force of the atheistic um argument from the knowledge of evil um depends upon um goodness basically, or basically an intuition of goodness. Like evil is only a scandal if um we imagine a good world, if we can catch sight of an ideally good world and a world ordered according to goodness. Um, In the light of that ideal goodness, then evil becomes a scandal, truly a scandal. It is scandalous that evil exists from that viewpoint. But we could imagine a viewpoint from which this scandal does not obtain. There is no scandal about it. And that would be the case in a genuinely nihilistic universe. That is in a universe wherein there is no objective value at all. And you know, uh horrible things happen, good things happen, but we don't actually have a basis to say they're good or horrible, really. Things are just taking course. Um, and if there's no value at an ontological level, then we really don't have much basis for saying that murder and torture of children, like brother Ivan talks about in the Brothers Karamazov, Dostoevsky. There is no place from which a moral objection might be given if nihilism genuinely obtains, if there is no value at an ontological level. Therefore, the atheistic critique from evil, which, as I've said, is incredibly potent, I think, and you just need to read this chapter from Dostoevsky's novel to feel the real force of this argument. Um, this position, nonetheless, gains its force, gains its power, gains its potency from a certain place, and that place is from an intuition of goodness, of value, and of, for example, the innocence of children being good, perhaps sacred, perhaps scandalous to violate, which is what I certainly feel, and which is what I think Dostoevsky is sort of illuminating that kind of intuition in in having Ivan tell these stories. So the scandal of evil itself comes to light as a scandal through what Max Scheler would call the valueception, the intuitive insight into the value of goodness, the innocence of humanity, or the innocence of children, the dignity of humanity, um, the goodness of being in Platonic terms. So if you didn't, if you, so the argument, there's an asymmetry, is my point, between good and evil here, that the atheistic argument from evil depends upon an ideal good, which is not being realized, which is being violated, which is being trampled over, uh, marred, destroyed, something like this. Um, so yeah, this I thought I just wanted to explore that thought a bit in this video, and I would love to hear any feedback on this line of thinking and any criticism. Um, because yeah, I think that very strong atheistic arguments can be given, and that those arguments are not easy to meet, and indeed probably can't be met with purely rational arguments, because their moral force is so potent. Um, but the potency of the moral force of the argument, which is very strong, depends upon a certain intuition of value. Um, so yeah, thanks for listening.